Good evening, Year 11. So we'll just take an opportunity to look at an extract from Act 1, Scene 3 of Macbeth. So we've got this lovely extract here, Act 1, Scene 3. At this point in the play, Banquo and Macbeth have just received their prophecies from the witches, and Macbeth has also just heard that he's been made Thane of Cawdor. So we're going to have a really quick read through this extract, and then we're going to have a look at the question, the type of question the exam board might throw at us for this extract, and then we're going to explore this extract together. So it starts with Banquo speaking to his good friend Macbeth. He says, "That trusted home might yet enkindle you to the crown besides the Thane of Cawdor. But 'tis strange, and oftentimes to win us to our harm, the instruments of darkness tell us truths, win us with honest trifles, to betray's in deepest consequence." He then says to Ross and Angus, "Cousins, a word I pray of you." So Banquo goes off to join Ross and Angus, and we have this lovely moment where Macbeth speaks to himself, and as an audience we are privy to his innermost thoughts. Macbeth says, "Two truths are told, as happy prologues to the swelling act of the imperial theme." To Ross and Angus, "I thank you, gentlemen." Aside again we hear his thoughts. "This supernatural soliciting cannot be ill, cannot be good. If ill, why hath it given me earnest of success commencing in a truth, I am Thane of Cawdor? If good, why do I yield to that suggestion, whose horrid image does unfix my hair, and make my seated heart knock at my ribs against the use of nature? Present fears are less than horrible imaginings. My thoughts, whose murder yet is but fantastical, shake so my single state of man, that function is smothered in surmise, and nothing is but what is not." And Banquo comments on his friend's state and says, "Look how our partner's wrapped." So that's our extract from Act 1, Scene 3. The question we're going to focus on is, Shakespeare uses Banquo as a foil character to the hero Macbeth. Starting with this moment in the play, explore how far you agree with this view. So this is something that the exam board have started to do more and more, give you a little provocative statement, and then ask you to explore how far you agree with that statement. Shakespeare uses Banquo as a foil character. Now in the exam we will obviously write about how Shakespeare presents Macbeth and Banquo here in this moment in the play, and then we would reference elsewhere in the play where we see that relationship between Macbeth and Banquo. So let's remind ourselves, what is a foil character? A foil character, as we know, is a character that completely juxtaposes, completely contrasts another character. And it's usually a character that contrasts the protagonist, the hero. Okay, so we're going to have a little look at a few lines of Banquo, and we're going to think about what does this tell us about the character. So we've got these wonderful lines here when Banquo says, "But 'tis strange, and oftentimes to win us to our harm, the instruments of darkness tell us truths. They win us with honest trifles, to betray us in deepest consequence." So we can see that, first of all, Banquo knows that the witches are instruments of darkness. They are evil, they are devious. The witches might be tricking us. And we can see that Banquo is very insightful because he knows that evil beings, such as witches, will often act like this. They will often tell mortals, tell humans truths, and it's to win them to their harm. So we can see here we've got this lovely clip art, "Be careful." Banquo is cautioning Macbeth. He's warning his friend, "Be careful, my friend. Have caution. Do not believe everything that you are told." So this tells us that Banquo is cautious. He's a cautious person. He's wary. It also tells us he's insightful. He's intelligent. He realizes that evil beings will often trick humans. And we also see, because he recognizes evil when he sees it, he is a good and honourable man. Okay, so let's now compare this good, honourable man, Banquo, at this moment in the play, to his friend Macbeth. And to do that, we're going to look at these 3 lines here. Macbeth is in the middle of his aside. We as an audience are getting an insight into his innermost, perhaps his darkermost thoughts. He says, 2 truths are told as happy prologues to the swelling act of the imperial theme. So he's saying, I've been told 2 truths. The witches say, all hail Macbeth, hail to thee, Thane of Glamis. That is true. He is Thane of Glamis. All hail Macbeth. Hail to thee, Thane of Cawdor. That is also now true. He has been made the Thane of Glamis. So Macbeth realizes the witches have told him 2 truths. However, we can see his growing ambition here because he sees these 2 truths as prologues, almost like tasters, trailers of something better that is to come. These are just prologues to when he actually wears the crown, when he wears the imperial crown of Scotland. So we'll think about, what do these 3 lines reveal about Macbeth? Well, no surprise, it reveals he's really ambitious. His mind is already, he's just got the Thane of Cawdor, and instead of pausing and being happy with this, already his mind is racing ahead to think about this moment when he wears that imperial crown, when he wears the golden round of Scotland. So we can see his vaulting ambition right from here in Act 1, Scene 3. But it also shows that Macbeth takes the prophecies really seriously. He's really bought into what the witches have told him. He's put his faith in the instruments of darkness. He wants to believe them. They've told him truths. They've won him over with this, Thane of Cawdor, and now he wants to believe them. He wants to believe that one day he will be king. Of course he does. He's a highly ambitious man. So he puts his faith in the instruments of darkness. So let's compare Macbeth to Banquo. Let's carry on with this. So we go on and we see these 2 other lines. Again, he's talking to himself. Only the audience can hear it. And he says, this supernatural soliciting, this dealing with the supernatural, this temptation from the supernatural, it cannot be bad, but it cannot be good. So we see that Macbeth is torn. He's debating and he's deliberating over whether this temptation by the weird sisters is good or bad. This temptation, this crown that's offered to him, he's debating, he's deliberating. Is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? So we can see straight away through this use of supernatural soliciting, this verb soliciting, it tells us that Macbeth is tempted by the witch's prophecy. He's really been drawn in. And this temptation, as all temptations of characters are, this temptation is reminiscent. It reminds us of the biblical story where the devil in the Garden of Eden tempted Eve to eat the fruit of the tree of life. So this temptation of Macbeth by the evil witches is reminiscent of Eve's temptation by the devil, by Satan. So just as it didn't end well for Eve, we as an audience, we know and we fear that this temptation of Macbeth, this soliciting of Macbeth, will not end well. And of course, indeed it does not. So Macbeth, like Eve, listens to and gives in to evil. Macbeth succumbs to temptation and he opens his heart to these evil imaginings, this evil soliciting. And straight away we can see he begins to imagine what he will have to do to seize the crown, to seize the golden round. He talks about, if good, why do I yield? Why do I give in to this suggestion, whose horrid image doth unfix my hair and make my seated heart knock against my ribs, against the use of nature? So we see that his mind leaps straight away to regicide, to killing Duncan, to this horrid image of regicide, this murder fantastical. And This thought of regicide, never mind the deed, the thought of regicide alone is enough to unfix Macbeth's hair, make his hair stand on end, and cause his heart to knock violently in his chest. So we can see that Macbeth has caused physical turmoil, just by the very thought of regicide. Okay, so if we're coming back to this question, how does Shakespeare use Banquo as a foil to Macbeth? A complete contrast, a juxtaposition. Well, we can see really clearly that Banquo is cautious and careful. He warns Macbeth. He's wary and mistrustful of the witches. He doesn't trust them, obviously. This shows that Banquo is a good and honourable man. He will always do the right thing. He warns Macbeth about the dangers of believing the instruments of darkness. Now, how does this compare with Macbeth? In this scene, we clearly see Macbeth is ambitious and impulsive. And we remember this is long before Lady Macbeth gets involved. This is before he goes home. This is before his wife starts with her weapons of manipulation. Here on his own, Macbeth is exceedingly ambitious. He desperately wants to believe that the witch's prophecy. He's tempted by the witches, and he gives in to temptation. He allows his mind to imagine this murder fantastical, this horrid imagining. So we can see that he's really quick to consider rash and drastic measures. And straight away, without much prompting at all, Macbeth, our hero, brave Macbeth, Valor's minion, worthy gentleman, we see that our hero is very quick to indulge in horrible, terrible thoughts of regicide. Okay, so how would we put this together in a what, how, why paragraph exploring this extract? So we would take everything that we've explored, and let's go through it together. Our what? Our AO1. When we are interpreting Shakespeare's ideas and showing the exam board, we understand exactly how Shakespeare is using Banquo in this scene to juxtapose Macbeth. In this scene, Shakespeare uses Macbeth as a complete foil to our hero Macbeth. He uses Macbeth's cautious, noble nature to juxtapose with Macbeth's impulsive, ambitious nature. Ironically, Banquo is presented as noble and righteous, whilst our hero, Macbeth, is shown to have a dark and devious side to his nature. So there's our what. We're outlining to the exam board, we understand how Shakespeare is using Banquo as a foil to Macbeth. Now we have to drill into this AO2, the methods and the meaning they create for the audience. So let's have a look at how Shakespeare uses Banquo as a foil to Macbeth. Shakespeare shows Banquo counselling his friend, urging Macbeth to be wary of the witch's prophecies. Banquo reminds his friend that oftentimes the instruments of darkness tell us truths to win us to our harm. Here Banquo is highlighting the evil and malevolent nature of witches and witchcraft. We might argue that Banquo is acting as Macbeth's conscience, bidding him to act wisely, nobly, cautiously. This appellation, this name, Instruments of Darkness, reveals that Banquo sees clearly that these weird sisters are evil. They are evil practitioners of malefice. They have bound themselves to darkness and the devil. Now this portrays Banquo as a good and noble man who has good insight and intelligence. It also shows that he doesn't want to believe. He doesn't want to trust the witches. He's reticent to believe and trust the prophecies of these midnight hags. And you'll notice there that we're using those alternative names to refer to the witches. We're using Shakespeare's language as our own. Instruments of darkness, weird sisters, midnight hags. Now we continue with the how. So we've dealt with Banquo. We've spoken about how Shakespeare is using Banquo and the meaning this creates for the audience. Now let's think about how is Shakespeare using Macbeth. So we're acknowledging straight away that Banquo is a foil to Macbeth. In direct contrast, in direct juxtaposition, Shakespeare shows Macbeth eager and willing to believe the witches and put his faith in the prophecies. He questions the nature of this supernatural soliciting. Macbeth is deliberating whether it's right or wrong to dabble with dark magic. Now, as an audience, we understand, of course it's wrong. Of course it's wrong to dabble with dark magic. And we also understand this will not end well for Macbeth. The verb soliciting suggests Macbeth is tempted by what the witches have promised. This scene echoes the biblical temptation of Eve by Satan, and we understand that Macbeth too is about to give in to the devil and stray from the path of righteousness. Macbeth's mind turns immediately to murder fantastical, regicide. And we understand that even the thought of this heinous sin of regicide is enough to cause Macbeth's hair to stand on end, make his heart pound. This implies that Macbeth is charged, perhaps even excited by the prospect of killing Duncan and seizing the crown. And this further reveals the extent of Macbeth's impulsive nature and, of course, his vaulting ambition to be king, to seize the golden round. Now we're going to think about why AO3, the context, the writer's big ideas. We don't want any bolt-ons. We don't want any mention of King James I at this point in time. It's not relevant. We're thinking about why this, why now? Why is Shakespeare showing this moment of the play here to his audience? What's his big idea? How is he using the characters? What does he want the audience to understand? That's what our why is all about. Shakespeare uses Banquo as a complete and utter foil in this scene. He uses Banquo's natural unwillingness to put his faith in the witches to contrast Macbeth's quick willingness to embrace the prophecies of the witches. This is the first time that Shakespeare shows any chink in the armour of brave Macbeth. For the first time, we see another side to this worthy gentleman. Shakespeare is here foreshadowing Macbeth's vaulting ambition and the murder fantastical that he goes on to commit. So this is a really nice why to finish our what, how, why exploration of the extract. We're talking about what it allows us to see, what Shakespeare wants us to understand, and what it foreshadows to come later in the play. Okay, so having dealt with this extract, we now need to get our brains thinking, where is there another moment in the play where we see Shakespeare using Banquo as a foil to Macbeth? Where else do we see a complete juxtaposition between Banquo, who is a good and noble man, and Macbeth, who becomes increasingly monstrous throughout the play? We will rack our brains and we will come back to explore two other moments in the play that we could use as our counterpoint to this extract.